Hello, everyone. This is Maya. It's a lovely Monday here when we're recording this conversation, enjoying the summertime, but most of all, enjoying that I finally managed to get to speak to you on my on my podcast, Annabel de Maria. Annabelle is a very special guest for me, and you see why. And especially when we speak about my latest mini series around standard of care and the importance of standard of care for making clinical trials more efficient. Why? Because Annabelle, she's the chief patient officer of Alira Health. And throughout the years, she's been involved in so many patient engagement projects, like so many of them. I mean, I have the privilege of knowing Annabelle for quite some time now. I wish I knew her even before that. But like she told me so many different stories. Like one of it, I have to say that I always remember. Like when I think about Annabelle, I always remember about this story is the fact that she was a part of the launch of Viagra when she was part of Pfizer. So Annabelle, please introduce yourself briefly to our audience, your background, and like tell us a little bit more about yourself. And of course, once again, welcome, Annabelle.
Well, Maya, thank you. I appreciate so much the invitation because I always have lovely conversations with you, and today it's going to be, I'm sure, another one. Basically, myself, as you said, I'm the Chief Patient Officer at Alira. I've spent almost 30 years now, which you say when you're a little bit old, right? But you see, if you've been able to spend 30 years in patient engagement, it's a lot. And I started my career when I was 25 in the pharmaceutical industry. Since today, I've been in 7 different pharmaceutical companies around the globe and working on very different type of profiles and drug profiles, basically. So basically, this is me now. I am the chief patient officer at Alira and working on a very transversal function, securing that the voice of the patient is raised and it's heard throughout the whole life cycle management of a drug or a medical device.
Yeah, thank you, Annabelle. And um, I want to mention something because that's you mentioned your role at the Alira Health, but I know one of the things I don't know Alira so well, though I know it's quite innovative company with a mission. I've been following Alira Health's CEO for quite some time, and I know that the company has a quite of a patient aligned mission, which is really amazing. But I know from you how much you're trying in your role to educate companies of why and how they can and they should speak with patients as early as possible. So I always admired this work. Annabelle, we have a very important need actually today, which
Mhm.
is a conversation we started even when I actually invited you. You kind of asked me, hey Maya, would you like to discuss the patient journey or the patient pathway or the standard of care? And you're actually raising a very good question. I even decided to run a poll on LinkedIn to see what people think. But tell me, from your experience, how do you see the difference between standard of care, patient pathway, and patient journey? Is there a difference, and what is the difference?
Yeah, I think there's a difference, and to me, there's an important more than a difference. There's an important nuance, which
Mm,
is the patient pathway. To me, it's what it happens in real world. So all those gaps and barriers in the system that the patient is gonna pass through at each stage of his or her treatment. So there's gonna be a series of different steps and the patient is going to pass through all those steps, and that theoretically is the standard of care because
mm,
many things may happen across this pathway, right? However, to me, the patient journey is like an extra layer that you may add on the top of this patient pathway, which is how does the patient live experiences sorry how does the patient experience the patient
mm,
pathway, right? Meaning that there's going to be an interpretation from the emotions of the patient on how is it this pathway, how painful it is or how delicate or how easy or what are the insights that you can extract from this journey. And all that together gives you a picture that is much more complete than the pure patient pathway. So I may say that the pure patient pathway is more technical, while the patient journey, it adds an extra emotional layer maybe.
mm.
I hope I'm kind of explaining this well, because I know it's not an easy task. When you interview a patient about his or her pathway, they immediately bring you a bunch of details and nuances that are about their experience.
Yeah, and that's absolutely critical because, like with many things, like we're so different, each one of us. So it's about our perspective and how do we experience something. So maybe something, like for example, with pain, that pain is probably one of the most difficult endpoint to measure because it's not about what you think it's the pain, but how do you experience that?
I have a super experience with the pain thing. We
Yeah.
had we wanted to check in one of our clinical studies. We wanted to check how patients were interpreting the validated questionnaire in pain, and the
Mm,
disease that we were working on, it was pain induced by chemotherapy. And when we asked patients about the validated scale, was basically the first question was from 1 to 5, how much pain do you have in the morning? And patients responded to us, I don't have pain. And we were like very surprised about, you don't have pain, so what do you have? And they responded, well, we basically have like pins and needles or
mm,
numbness, but we don't have pain. And that was interesting because we may even give for granted that a validated scale called validated scale in pain, it's the right one to use. And it may happen that the patient is interpreting the word pain, which is the central word in a validated scale for pain. So as you said very well, each of us are very different. We interpret things differently, right? And that's why, for me, the patient journey is about interpretations, emotions, understanding, insights, experiences.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's go back to the patient pathway, Annabelle. You actually mentioned in earlier conversations that one of the things that led you to go after this patient engagement career was exactly a project. I think the Viagra one. You mentioned the Viagra one. That this opened your eyes, and that actually led you to start working in patient engagement and everything around patient. So, how critical is to understand the patient pathway?
Well, you see, in the case of Viagra, understanding the patient pathway or the patient journey, whatever we want to call it today, is as critical as you can fail completely at the time of commercialization if you haven't understood very well the patient journey at the time of clinical. So, in an ideal world, I always used to say that everything should happen in clinical when it comes to patient engagement. Why? Because that is the time when everything is going to be set, including HTA, HTA requirements or commercialization requirements. And I'll give you the example of Viagra. When we start with the clinical development of Viagra, it happened by absolute chance. We never
Mm,
expected to start developing Viagra on erectile dysfunction. We just did it because by chance, patients living another trial were reporting very good signals of good
yeah.
erections, let me say. And so, and so we never asked them about their emotions, their impressions, and what they were feeling about the disease. We just gave it for granted that we had the super drug, the drug itself. Indeed, we didn't even ask for reimbursement. We just arrived it into the market. We felt very, uh, I might even say a little bit arrogant, in the sense that we felt we
Mm,
had the super drug and we could launch without reimbursement because everybody would be super keen to
yeah, to
come
get it.
and take the drug. What happened in real life is that no single patient showed up at the doctor's office, right? Why? Because they were so afraid about recognizing the disease. No single man wanted to go themselves and be in front of the doctor and recognize, hey, doctor, I do have erectile dysfunction. Basically, this was it. But it took us 3 years to understand. We had to go back, do a whole patient journey, right? We need to
Mm,
interview all those patients. We need to understand how they felt, why they didn't want to have a conversation with their doctors. And once we understood the whole journey, we could fix it. Indeed, we fix it with a very basic kind of activity, let me say, because we tried to understand who could be an ambassador around the globe that they could trust. And we finally understood that Pelé, the soccer player, the Brazilian soccer player,
mm,
was a good ambassador for them. And we just hired Pelé, we put him on the television. And
yeah.
Pelé was saying, if I had erectile dysfunction, I would talk to my doctor, full stop. But we lost 3 years of sales. While on the television, on the papers, everywhere. We all used to see those headlines about Viagra, the super drug. That was not true in the first 3 years. We didn't
Yeah.
sell properly during the first 3 years. So ideally,
How did
patient
you?
pathway should be fixed in clinical.
Yeah, I actually don't understand that. What do you mean by saying like the patient pathway should be fixed in clinical? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you're right. I was not clear enough because what I mean is that you should develop a patient journey in clinical by interviewing an important group of people, an important sample size.
Mhm.
You should interview them, define what is the patient journey, understand what are the gaps in that journey, understand what are the pains in that journey, and also understand how you can fix those gaps and those pains. And for you to do that, you have the time of clinical for you to be ready at time of commercialization. So in the case of Viagra, if we had known it in advance enough, we would have start preparing the market much more in advance of the launch and making people talking about their sexuality in a much easier way,
Mm,
and make it, and also
yeah.
prepare doctors for those conversations that we never did.
Yeah, I actually wonder. That's just an assumption. I may be totally wrong here, but with Viagra, for example, for erectile dysfunction, there must have been a clinical trial precisely for that. Like how, when you say you failed the first 3 years, do you also consider the clinical trial itself, or you mean the even only the commercial side of things? Didn't you actually gather this nuance of like not willing to share like with their doctors, even identifying the patient should be a signal that there's something wrong.
No, and that's the problem here, that we didn't recognize the big problem until we were in the market already. So we
Mm,
were in commercialization process, meaning we just had 10 years for us
wow.
to recover the investment, right? And so
Yeah.
if you just have 10 years and you lose three, and also during that process, competitors were arriving in the market, that was an absolute disaster. And you may say, but Viagra sold tons and tons and millions of dollars. Correct. But Viagra could have sold double and triple
Triple.
those
Yeah.
$1 million, right?
Yeah.
Simply because we didn't recognize the problem until the second and the third year.
Yeah. Do you recall how did you come up with this idea? We tried everything for 3 years. Let's now go and speak with patients. Like, how did you come up with this idea? And that's like many years ago. So, what shifted your mind?
And so we came up with this idea by asking patients again, because by asking and asking, and you understand that they are all
But even
centralized.
asking the patients, Annabelle, sorry to interrupt you, but like, how did you even come up with the idea we need to go and speak with the patients? Because we've been speaking to doctors, nothing's selling basically. So let's go and ask the patients.
Oh, that's a very good question, Maya, because at that time, and we are talking about 29 years ago,
Yeah.
no one was talking to patients. That's a very good question. But we were so desperate that we
Yeah.
actually needed to say, okay, guys, we have to speak with patients because something is wrong and we don't know what it is. Of course, we were somehow uh, imagining, I don't know, but in general, all of us were kind of very clear of what could have happened, but we needed to prove it. And for that, we needed to go back and speak to patients. And it was an immediate reaction from patients, like, indeed, and now I'm talking about patients in Europe, because as you know, in the US, you can directly advertise drugs to patients. So
Mm.
by drugs, I mean brands. So in the US, you can advertise Viagra on the television. But
Mm.
so in the US, they were faster at speaking to patients because they were testing the advertisement. But in Europe, where our culture is still a little bit old fashioned when it comes to talk about sexuality, and I mean 30 years ago, not
Yeah.
now, right? We had to speak with them. There was no other option, no other.
Hmm. Very interesting. So you mentioned that's like 20 plus years ago. What's the difference with today?
Thanks God we have advanced a lot because at least we speak with patients. However, there's so much work to be done, Maya. We speak a lot with patients, but just depending on some diseases where there are more need for speaking with patients, we don't do it for granted in every disease type. As an example, we speak with patients much more in rare diseases than in chronic conditions. Sometimes we speak with patients too late when we are already in the market, where we should speak with patients prior to ideally even phase one, for us to understand very well their unmet needs, and therefore develop clinical plans who were much more supporting those unmet needs. So yes, we have advanced a lot, but yes, we still have a long journey to go.
Yeah. Why, Annabelle? Like, what stops us from having, let's say, if the ideal world is every single
Yeah.
clinical trial, every single patient project, launching project, every single plan, let's say, needs to go through some sort of a patient understanding. And I
Yeah.
have a question to that as well, but I'll ask that a little bit later. So, what stops us, if that's the ideal world, what stops us today, 20 years later, since like we know that it's important, what stops us today from doing that?
I used to hear a couple of good excuses. No, they are not good, but they are excuses. And one is compliance. So some companies are still saying that it is not compliant to speak with patients, which is not correct. You have to speak with patients in the right way, and you have to do things properly. That doesn't mean that it's not compliant. And then you also hear this excuse that I personally, it makes me angry, which is the one about the return of the investment, right? Still, some companies questioning what's the return of talking with patients. I really cannot understand how someone can even question that there is no return at speaking with patients. Speaking with patients has always a return. You cannot even imagine that every single time that you speak with a patient, you get an insight that is invaluable.
Yeah. So are these the top excuses, compliance and return on investment?
Those are the ones that I hear more often, right? Of course, there might also be some fear, and
Okay.
that's my personal opinion. Why? Because when you speak with patients, you may get your whole clinical trial questioned, and so you may not like to hear it. Some people does not ask because they don't want to hear the
Yeah.
response, right?
Yeah, that's so true, by the way. That's so true. There is, I think I told you about this book some time ago. It's called The Mom's Test. It's actually very a popular book among startups in the tech world. And it's basically you go and ask nobody else but your mom about your new idea only because your mom will support you. Come on, she's your mom. So you don't go to anyone else because you're like, well, my mom said it's a good idea. I'm going to go after my idea, only to realize that eventually you end up speaking with like the market, and then the market won't be your mom. So yeah, I understand this fear. Like
Correct.
I've been in this situation. Let's put it that way. But
Very,
like
very
thinking
well.
about the return on investment, I have two questions actually. You mentioned something very interesting, and you mentioned that in the United States you can do these commercials. You're just allowed to do these commercials, and that's one way to also understand the patient. So that brings me to this question: what are the different ways for you to understand patients? Is it only by speaking to them, or what are the different ways to actually understand better the patient pathway, the patient journey? Even today, like
Yeah.
in our universe where we are way more connected, can you give us what are the different alternatives and variations to understand the patient?
So there are different techniques that you can use when speaking with patients. Most of them are market research, and I will now explain a little bit about this. And some others are more about focus groups, which can also be considered market research for sure. But to me, they are more qualitative. They are more rich in terms of insights.
Yeah.
So when it comes to market research, you can do pure qualitative market research. So you interview patients one to one, and you get a proper sample of patients around the globe. You interview them, and then you get all the insights together, and you from there you can build a good patient journey. You can also do quantitative market research, but when you do quantitative market research, the patient auto responds the questions. And therefore, you put in front of the patient a questionnaire of not more than 15 minutes, and the patient is going to respond you. However, the nuances of the experiences,
Yeah.
emotions are more difficult to capture. There's another type of market research that I adore, which is the ethnographic studies. When you do ethnographic studies, you live with the patient. By living with the patient, imagine how much insights you can get, and you can so well understand what is it for that patient to live with that disease. There's another type of studies like Delphi panels, etc. But basically, those are the ones that we use the most. We also use a lot what we call patient advisory boards. You can call it
Hmm.
patient advisory boards, you can call it focus groups, you can call it whatever you wish. But at the end, in this type of technique, you put a group of 6 or 7 patients together for them to discuss about one specific topic. It might be, as an example, the endpoint of a trial, or it might be checking the logistics of a protocol of a clinical trial. It might be many things, the topics, right? But at the end of the day, they discuss and they put a solution in common, which is always very interesting. Sometimes it can be with patients, and sometimes it's with patient representatives. So these are different type of angles here. You don't always need the angle of a patient or the angle of a patient representative. It might depend on the final goal of your project.
Mm. What about the difference when, and how do you balance? Because I think you need both, but how do you balance work with patient advocates and like lay patients, for example?
That's a very good question. The example that I brought about the pain, we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to check on a scale, a validated scale, and we wanted to understand if patients joining the trial would understand well the scale. So basically, in this case, we needed to work with patients because what we were going to have in the trial are real lay patients, right? We're not going to have patient association representatives in the trial. And for that matter, we needed the opinion of the patients. But say that we want to check the endpoint of the trial. Patient association representatives, they are very well aware, they are very savvy, and they have a bunch of knowledge on what is it the endpoint of a trial and why and how it should be designed. And what are the needs that at HTA level you're going to find later on in the process. Therefore, if you check a protocol or the endpoint of a trial with patient representatives, you may get a lot of additional suggestions that can enrich a lot the protocol itself.
Hmm. Okay, so that's a very interesting thing, like enriching the protocol. I know today is very trendy to discuss ways to quantify, I'm sorry, to quantify the patient burden by looking and analyzing the protocols. I also know that the majority of companies that are trying to follow this approach are simply it's not simple, but let's say that's what they do today. They kind of compare the burden that their protocol may be causing to patients with
Right.
other protocols. But shouldn't we actually, Annabelle, shouldn't we compare our protocol, like our protocol's burden, with the burden that the patient pathway is presenting to the patients?
Yes, I agree with you completely. We should compare it this way, but still, we should be aware about the burden that we are bringing with that protocol, right?
Yeah, of
So,
course.
yeah, and you can compare it even with both if you wish. But I think there's a case published by the EMA. It's a case on Duchenne where caregivers were requested for gene therapy. In this case, caregivers were requested to bring those kids to the center of excellence one or two, if I remember well, 1 or 2 times a month. So usually, center of excellence in gene therapy, they may be like 400 kilometers from home. And that
Mm,
was not an option for those caregivers. That was too much burden, even compared to the standard of care, right?
yeah.
And so those burdens have to be checked, yes or yes.
Yeah, you're so right. Last week, I recorded another conversation around pediatric research. And I'm pretty sure you know Megonia. And she has this amazing project where she's assessing the burden of, because she
Cross
worked,
border.
the language, yes, cross border, exactly, cross border. That basically there are only these few excellent centers. It's not even excellent centers, like pediatric centers that are conducting these clinical trials for kids.
Correct.
But like she mentioned, there was like a whole episode on that. Sometimes doctors are working only with international families. I say families because usually it's not just the patient, but it's
True.
also their parents and so on and so forth. And that causes a huge mess. And it's, sometimes uh, I'm questioning. We speak about a lot in clinical research what is ethical, what's not ethical. What, for example, question is it ethical to conduct clinical trials on on kids? That's like another story. But is it ethical to have one hospital in one country for a population of kids that spread throughout the whole
I know.
continent? Like, is that ethical? Anyway, it's another big
We won't
question.
fix it. Exactly, we won't fix it. I
Yeah,
know.
absolutely.
What I
Uh,
may dare to say
yeah,
is that it is not ethical to run a clinical trial without having a speaking with patients before
I
starting the
agree.
trial.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I don't think it's ethical to start any project without speaking with the patients themselves. It's the same thing like you creating a product without speaking with the possible customer, not getting their feedback. But here, the stakes are much higher. We speak about their health, their comfort, their life. Anyway, Annabelle, I have another question, which is again to do with the return on investment. And it's kind of a two-sided question because on one side, let's say that there is an impact speaking with patients, but on the other side, there is a cost for speaking with patients. And I've never run such. I mean, I did run such projects, let's say, but in my case, we found a way to do it very cost efficient. But what's your experience? Is it that expensive to run such a project, or is it lack of coordination so that you're able of doing this patient engagement early on?
Wow, Maya, I love that you're raising this question because if you compare the total cost of a clinical trial, right? Say, I mean, phase two, one a small trial for a biotech, it could be even something around 10 million euros. So we are speaking
Hmm.
about big, big numbers. How much is it to speak with a group of 6 or 7 patients in an advisory board? Maximum price that we might be speaking about 30Ks. So
Yeah.
compared to those 10 millions, how much is that? It's ridiculous. And I find it unacceptable that still someone is discussing about the price of speaking with patients. Although when people speak about return of the investment, they go even beyond. They're not just talking about how much does it cost to speak with patients. They talk about, is this going to bring us a return? Which there are some studies that are definitely explaining that by speaking with patients in phase two, you may accelerate 6 months time to regulatory and you may save $500,000. Why? Basically, because if you check the protocol with a group of patients, you may avoid one amendment of the protocol, which means you may avoid one resubmission of the protocol, which is a delay in time and is an extra cost. So, definitely speaking with patients pays off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And also, I wonder actually, where do you see the role of like technology and understanding patients? And I will be like more precise here. For example, you mentioned the commercials as one way to understand, kind of like to get
Wait a
signals.
minute. I
Yeah,
mentioned the commercial of, yeah, but we have to explain this well because
yeah,
I don't want to confuse the public here.
yeah,
So when you do a commercial, you test the commercial
yeah, of
and
course,
then you test the commercial with patients and you may get some insights. That doesn't mean exactly that you're going to get the patient journey. You may get
sure.
some insights from the commercial. Just
Got it.
just to be clear, because I was concerned about the sentence that I gave here.
That's
I
why I
don't want
asked you
to
once
confuse
again,
anyone.
Annabelle, to make sure that it's clear. Still, it's good to have these things in on top of your head because not every company and let's say not every founding team of a biotech company, for example, has these type of mindset. So
Uh-huh.
these things are essential that to be able to even monitor, and you can do that like not just with TV commercials. You can do that with Facebook advertisement and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
It doesn't help you to understand the patient pathway and the perspective of the patient,
Yes.
but it does give you some signals that can then help you to point you in the right direction. I have another question. There are so many questions. I know we don't have much time, but I need to cover at least one more, one or two more.
Yep.
Um,
Sure.
is there a big difference between the patient pathway, let's say the patient journey? Is there a big difference between the patient journey from one country to the other? And how should you be basically if let's say you are, let's say you've done a focus group with a few, let's say, country, like patients from a few countries of the ones that you're gonna conduct your clinical trial. Is that enough?
Yeah, again, Maya, I love your questions because they are so to the point and very clear. So yes, there is a difference, an important one, when it comes to patient journey in the US or in Spain. In it, for example, when it comes to oncology journey, yeah,
Yeah.
Spain has an amazing public system. So you're a patient in oncological process, you feel supported, accompanied, secure. Of course, you have some fears, but for sure, you have all those difficulties that you have to deal with, emotionally speaking, but you at least feel that the system is supporting you. Same journey for same type of patient in the US can be absolutely different. And that's why when we draw patient journeys, we in general we try every time we try to draw patient journeys by country if possible.
Mm,
And there are more similarities in Europe for sure, but still there are differences between UK and Italy, and
mm,
there are big differences between France and Sweden,
yeah.
or Bulgaria, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
therefore, the more you understand the patient journey in that country, the more you're going to support those gaps that need to be filled in.
Yeah.
Basically, this is it.
And to what extent do reimbursement, like the reimbursement system, affect the patient journey? What is being reimbursed in the country, and
So
at
the
what stage of the patient journey?
maybe it's the most important step here, right?
Mm,
Because we have seen even inside the same country, we have even seen regions giving access and other regions not giving access to the same treatment, or
yeah.
one region giving immediate access and the other region taking like 10 months to give access to the same treatment, which is so unacceptable. So speaking about ethical that we were speaking in the past, I think that we could have another whole podcast about
Yeah.
the ethicals of the improvement and the
Uh,
reimbursements.
yes. Let's say many challenges to discuss. I hope that with people like you, Annabelle, we can get more comfortable in doing more patient engagement and get closer to this ideal world where there is no trial or no project involving patients, concerning patients, without actually understanding them first. I'm actually very hopeful. And I know that with time, both technology, but also um, our drive towards that, will make sure that we can achieve that. And if not with every clinical trial, then at least every single project that is meaningful, and has like some serious ambitions to change the patient journey, to change the healthcare system.
Really hope so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that we not only hope, but we also work towards that. So, with that, I really want to thank you for your work, for the fact that you're always open to share your stories, and for the example that you give us.
Maya, same goes from here to me, to you. So sorry. You are amazing. And the fact that
Thank
you're
you.
constantly, helping on messaging about this important topic, it is fantastic. So thank you so much for your effort, for your time, and for this podcast that I'm sure that is going to support many people, like hearing new stuff that is always welcome. Thank you so
That's
much.
the idea. Thank you, Annabelle.
Thank you, Maya. Have a good day.